So hi everyone, it is Azure Thursday again, and tonight we have 3 speakers and 3 different sessions for you about a variety of topics, Azure related of course. First, we have Martijn Baker, and Martijn is going to talk about how you can monitor enterprise data lakes at scale. Next, we have Menaka Basker-Pillai, and she is going to tell us all about Azure Network Security. And at last, we have Scott Hanselman again. He's becoming a frequent guest at this show, and he's going to tell us how he finished migrating his blog to Azure. So, without any further ado, let's introduce our first speaker, Martijn Baker. Hi, Martijn.
Hey, Sjoukje.
How are you?
Hi, Martijn.
I'm hanging in there with the lockdown and everything, but other than that, it's going fine.
Okay, good to hear, good to hear. So you have a lot of experience in cloud monitoring and analytics platform monitoring, right?
Yeah, that's what's been keeping me busy for the last 5 years. Not just that, I'm a data engineer, but that's one of the main roles I've been fulfilling. Okay,
nice. And what do you think? Are customers investing enough in monitoring at the moment, or is there room for improvement?
What we currently see with multiple customers is that monitoring is a topic on the management board. So there's money, there is sponsoring. There's not a lot of know-how on how to implement it, especially with this new situation in the cloud.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So you're going to tell us more about that in your upcoming session, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then the floor is yours. Good luck.
Thank you. Share my presentation. There we go. So thank you again for having me. My name is Martijn. I'll be talking about monitoring at scale, and I will be using a lot of examples from an enterprise data lake, which we've been working on for a multitude of customers. This is me. My name is Martijn Baker. I'm a data engineer working for Avanade since 2018. 3 years of experience in creating cloud monitoring solutions and 5 years of experience in creating monitoring solutions in DevOps teams. When I'm not doing data engineering or monitoring, I love to go rock climbing. Even though I'm slightly scared of heights, it still works out somehow. If people want to get in touch because of this talk, the only channel I have is my LinkedIn, but feel free to drop me a line over there. And I've drafted up some session goals for tonight. There's 3 of them, from high level to detailed level. My high level session goal is to get people listening to get familiarized with Azure monitoring capabilities and the jargon. On the mid-level, the design level, I want to introduce some ideas on how you can create your own monitoring solutions. My examples mainly focus on the enterprise data lake, but I'm sure it also applies to other distributed solutions that you want to create in the cloud. And on a development level, since I am a developer, I want to share my experiences on how to create, deploy, and maintain a solution, and also on how not to do it, because that's how we all start out. The first step for success is failure. First, I want to talk about why it's relevant now to talk about monitoring in an analytics solution. Because just 5 years ago, I was still working on an analytics solution on premises, where we had 3 virtual machines hosting SQL Server integration services on one of them to get data from source systems to our SQL Server database that was hosted on the second virtual machine. And on the third virtual machine, we had analysis services running, which is just an in-memory database or a pre-calculated database, depending on the model that you chose, which sped up end-user queries for that dashboard-like experience. So 3 Windows VMs We didn't even govern them. That was the operations side of the company that I was currently working for at the time. So the only thing that we actually had to monitor were our own designed workflows and software processes, and sometimes keep an eye out for available memory on the server or the utilization of the CPUs, but that was about it. Fairly easy compared to what we're doing now, because now we, for instance, implement Azure Data Factory. And Azure Data Factory uses 2 on-premises virtual machines to get data from an on-premise data source to the cloud. And we ingest that into an Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage container. Then my Azure Data Factory will get a token from the Key Vault, so it can start a Databricks notebook. These could be either in Python or written in Scala, then does some data transformation on that raw data, and then it will load it into Synapse, or previously known as SQL Data Warehouse, as modeled data ready for consumption. And this is a very simplified diagram even of what we're currently implementing at customers. So we have multiple programming languages, being Scala, Python, T-SQL, and Synapse. We have a GUI in Azure Data Factory. We have resources like Key Vault and the storage containers, which both work very different from one another. And we have those Windows virtual machines with Windows operating systems and stuff like the event viewer and other types of performance metrics. So the complexity and at least the distribution is so much more complex. And each of these resources is on my critical path to get that workflow, so from raw data all the way to informational data, to get that complete. So if my Key Vault fails and keeps on failing, the business won't have their data in time. So it's crucial that we monitor each of these resources. With that being said, although the landscape might seem more complex, the process is still very simple. I want to know when something's going wrong. I want to be notified. I want to be notified when it's happening now, but I also want to be notified when it might happen in a week from now. That's also possible. And I want to be notified without having to look at the monitor all day, right? I want to get a push notification or an email or maybe an item on my backlog saying, hey, something's going on, heads up. As soon as I have that notification, I want to then identify what's going on. I want to find a root cause of my incident as soon as possible. And I want to make a clear distinction between what's a root cause and what's a symptom, right? If I get a latency alert somewhere in my data lake, experience tells me that that's probably a symptom. Latency is never a root cause of something that's going on, but it's a very clear symptom that my end users are not going to be happy, right? So make that distinction. The third step in the process is remediation. So as soon as I've identified the problem, I want to also get all the data at my fingertips that I need to fully solve the problem adequately and efficiently. So very simple process: notify, identify, remediate. And that's what we will be focusing on in this presentation. So notifications, how do we get notified? Well, we can use Azure Alerts, and there's 3 flavors of which I will discuss 2 with you today: the metric alerts and the log alerts. And we'll jump right in for a demo because I don't want to be talking and killing you with a PowerPoint presentation straight on. So I'll go to the Azure portal and I want to create an alert for my Azure Data Factory. I've got one prepared right here. I just click it. I search for the monitoring menu, click alerts, and a blade opens up where in the top left, I can select the new alert rule. Click it. And then we need to apply a condition. And I want to get an alert as soon as a pipeline fails, meaning that my data transport from source to sink has failed. And I want to know about this because I might not be meeting my SLAs. So I'm clicking the failed pipeline metric. And for the threshold, I'm choosing a static threshold, meaning that if this event occurs, so if the event is greater than a total of 0 occurrences, I want to be notified. And I want to check every hour for the past hour, meaning that I'm now creating what they call a tumbling window of monitoring. So I click done. Next up is selecting an action group. And an action group defines what action is being taken if an alert is being triggered. And some of the flavors are sending an email or push notification, but you can also go one step beyond that and trigger a function app or activate a webhook to do some auto remediation stuff. For tonight, I'm keeping things simple. I've created an action group where it will send me an email as soon as stuff goes wrong. I'm going to select it. And then I need to come up with an alert name. And I'm going to go with ALT for alert, ADF for Azure Data Factory, error, which I will explain later, and then I'll say failed pipeline. Description I'll leave empty for now. I'm placing this alert in a specially prepared monitoring resource group, so not in the resource group of my Azure Data Factory, but in the resource group of my monitoring resources. And then I have to choose a severity. The highest severity being 0 and the lowest being 4. I'm going to go with 1 for the sake of example. Create. Waiting for this thing to become green. And we know that we have successfully created an alert for Azure Data Factory. If things were all this simple, I wouldn't have to present for you tonight and present at all these companies. Yes, this was very simple. And that's also some of the stuff that I like about metric alerts. It's out-of-the-box functionality. As soon as I have a data factory, I can make a metric alert to make sure that I keep a watch on this Azure Data Factory. It's easy to set up, and it allows for dynamic thresholds. The last one meaning that I can use or utilize machine learning algorithms to set the threshold for me. So not a static one that I just did, but maybe I want to govern more resources. So I'll need machine learning to see if I have any outliers that I should be alerted about. Of course, there's also stuff that I don't like, and that is that this metric alert is scoped to a single resource. This means that if I have 10 data factories that I want to monitor with this alert, that I'll have to recreate the same alert 10 times, one time for each of the data factories that I want to keep in check. And it gets even worse because I'm not only interested in failing pipelines, I might also be interested in failing activities. Let's say I have 5 to 10 alerts and then 10 data factories, meaning that I end up with 50 to 100 alerts. That's not maintainable. Also, these metric alerts don't provide any option for custom alert logic. And I personally, but this is a bit more subjective, I admit, but personally, I find the ARM syntax pretty complex. So, Microsoft, help us out here. Well, first I want to have a look at a list for metric alerts. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see all the type of resources that you can watch and then have multiple resources governed by a single alert, like virtual machines, which is okay for our example, SQL databases, which I like, of course, and key vaults. But what I greatly miss is multiple resources like Azure Data Factory, Synapse, Databricks, storage accounts. I mean, I usually have in my subscription over 10 storage accounts just by playing around with it. But also logic app, function app, app service plan, Kubernetes clusters, the list goes on and on. So we need something for this to monitor at scale. My solution, or what I would recommend, is the second type of alert, being a log alert. And I'm going to show you how this works with another demo. This time, I'm going to go to the Azure Monitor. By searching it, it pops up in my list. I click it. Then I can choose logs. And this takes me to my log analytics workspace. I'll explain more about log analytics in a bit. I'm just going to show you how I can take custom input here and turn it into an alert. So I'm going to type in the table name that holds the event that I want to have an alert placed on, which is ADF pipeline runs. Then on the next line, I'm going to filter the pipeline runs for a status, which is just the name of one of the columns, equal to failed. Running the query by pressing Shift-Enter, which is a whole lot better than just clicking with your mouse on Run. And please take note that Custo, unlike your case-insensitive SQL databases, is case-sensitive. So make sure you get that capitalization right. Now this query returns all my failed pipelines over the last 24 hours. I can also adjust the timer range here in the GUI or in my query, which I will do now, where time generated is more recent than, let's say, 6 hours ago. Run it, and now you see that in the last 6 hours, there's no pipeline failure. I can then click New Alert Rule, and that takes me to the same blade we just saw, just slightly different. So we're taking that query as my alert logic. Again, I'm going to specify the threshold of being 0. So if this query returns a result, please notify me. You can see that the period in minutes it's set in the query, 6 hours, but we could also adapt this here. So let's say 2 hours, I'll adjust the query. And then the frequency also 2 hours. So every 2 hours, check if we have a pipeline failure. Say done. Again, we're going to add an action group that will send me an email if this occurs. We're going to specify an alert name, being ALT for alert, ADF for ADF, error, which I will explain later, failed pipelines. Place it in my monitoring resource group, same severity as a while back, and say create. We're creating the alert rule, and it's done. If you look at my query, and I will zoom in a bit, sorry, I should have done that earlier. But if you look at my query, you see that I don't filter on a specific resource, meaning that each Azure Data Factory that logs to this specific table in Log Analytics will now be governed by this alert. So any data factory in my subscription that sends its telemetry here will now alert me as soon as one of their pipeline is failing. This is very handy, I think at least. I hope you think as well. So what I like about this is that customizable alert logic, but not just that, also that we can scope this to a single resource based on the query we type or multiple resources. And the ARM syntax is slightly less complex than with the metric alerts. So I really like these log alerts. What I don't like is that it doesn't allow any dynamic threshold setting. And it also requires a diagnostic setting as child resource, meaning that if I just provision Azure Data Factory without a diagnostic child resource setting, the telemetry won't end up in my log analytics workspace. And I will also need to provision that log analytics workspace in order for this to work. So it's slightly more complex to set up. Right, so I already said metrics and logs, right? And in order for us to continue with the presentation, we need to establish a little bit of an understanding on the Azure Monitor product and these two types of data in the Azure Monitor product. So I greatly simplified the product overview in this slide, but Azure Monitor helps me to visualize my metrics and logs data, analyze, so search through it and help me debug it, and respond to it, like we just saw in the creation of that metric alert and that log alert. But what's the difference between metrics and logs? They're both databases. They're both internal to Azure Monitor. And as soon as I create an Azure resource, like Azure Data Factory, SQL Database, storage account, this resource will automatically start creating metric data. It's stored in a time series database in Azure Monitor, and it's kept there for 93 days. You have no say in what metric data is being stored or what categories. This all just comes out of the box, and that's a good thing. It helps you set up things fast and create overviews. Logs, on the other hand, are very much more specific. I need a child resource on my Azure resource so that I can send this log data to my log analytics workspace, and then I can use it to analyze it using that Custo query language. You also have these VMs that we host on premises to form a gateway between on-premises and the Azure cloud. And these operating systems, if you install the Microsoft monitoring agent on those VMs, they can also send their data to a log analytics workspace. So that's why I put them here on the left as well. Operating systems can also generate log data. Azure resources can most of the time generate metric and log data, with some exceptions. The most notably one being that Databricks doesn't supply us with any metrics, and storage account until recently didn't supply us with any log data, but that's now in public preview. So to sum it up, metrics versus logs. Metrics are numeric, logs are more descriptive. Metrics come out of the box, logs need a custom setup. Metrics are great for giving me a graphical overview of a certain resource or metric for trend analysis or resource comparison, while logs are very detailed and help me to debug or even to establish an auditing trail. The metrics are always stored for 93 days. You cannot change this. But logs, these are stored for a custom duration with a maximum of 2 years. Metrics don't cost you anything apart from the costs that the resource itself incurs. Logs, you will be billed for ingestion and storage duration in Log Analytics Workspace. You're exempt from the first couple of gigabytes of ingestion each month, and you're exempt from the storage costs of the first month, but after that, you will start paying Microsoft. It's very important to note that these metrics and logs data supplement each other. There's not one that I value above the other, although I do have a slight preference for the log data. So enough talking, demo time again. Let's have a look at the Azure Data Factory metrics. So instead of going to my Azure Data Factory resource itself, I again went to the Azure Monitor, and then I click Metrics here on the left-hand menu, which opens up the Metrics Explorer. It's going to ask me for a scope, and I'm going to open up my analytical resource group with that one data factory in it. See, why can't I select multiple resources? You can upvote this, and you should after this talk. I click Apply. I select the metric, being field pipeline run. And I'm going to select a different time window, being that of the last 7 days. Click Apply. And now I see that each of these days, my data factory, this is very small, so I'm going to read it for you. My data factory with the name ADF, AT, ANA dev was actually running in an error. So let's add another metric and compare this with what's happening on production. So I can click that scope. Click production, say apply, and select that same metric, field pipeline runs. And now we can see that the same is happening on production. Didn't start quite at the same time, but it happened a bit later. And I can even add a filter in the Metric Explorer saying, only show me this pipeline and this pipeline. This is about the most detailed level that we can get with Azure Metrics. So I can see the data factory and the pipeline name of my failing data factory and pipeline. And if I zoom in, I can keep on zooming in, but the data does not give me more information, right? I can just see the moment in time when the failure occurred. So what about logs, right? If we want more detailed information, like we just saw, we're going to need logs. So let's first enable them in the portal for this Azure Data Factory. I'm going to go to the portal again. I now clicked on my Azure Data Factory. And as you can see, there's already some metrics being presented straight out of the box. I didn't do anything, just in the overview blade. I then click Diagnostic Settings on the monitoring menu. And I click Add Diagnostic Setting. And I'm going to collect activity runs, pipeline runs, trigger runs, and all metrics. And this is where things get a little bit fuzzy. Weren't these also the metrics of this resource? Didn't we just see pipeline runs failing in the metrics explorer? How can they also be logs? Yeah, that's a good question. I also struggle with it sometimes. There's no real clear distinction between the two. And I can even say that I want to send my metrics, so my metric data, to log analytics. So I can then query it using that Gusto query language. But here's also more. These SSIS logs that we can also gather. I'm not clicking them for the sake of this example, but there's definitely a case where you could need this telemetry as well. I'm going to come up with a nice name for this diagnostic setting, logs, and I'll send them to a log analytics workspace, being this one. And then here, I get an option for a destination table. Now, this is my first error that I made with using log analytics. If you gather all of your telemetry in the Azure Diagnostics table, you'll run into a limitation. Because these resources, if they all log to the same table, Key Vault, SQL database, Azure Data Factory, each of these telemetry types will introduce its own set of columns. And the maximum number of columns in log analytics for a table is 500. And they won't tell you that you've reached your maximum. So if you add another resource to your Azure Diagnostics table, and the table, the column count is crossing that 500 column limit, it won't log your telemetry, and it's really hard to figure out why. So make sure your destination table is resource specific. Click Save, and you're done. All very nice, but we would also like to automate this. So why not enable these logs in an ARM template? So I'm taking you to my ARM template for my Azure Data Factory. And as you can see, Azure Data Factory resources are very easy. It's just a type, a name, and a system assigned identity and a location. And just like in the portal, I want to add a diagnostic setting resource as a child resource to my data factory. So I'm going to open up a new resources array of the type /providers/diagnostic settings. I can also do this at the root level, but then I need to type more. Then I'll have a type of Microsoft.datafactory/factories/providers/diagnostic settings. And since we don't like typing because each symbol can be another bug, I like to go with the child resource option in the template. I then give it the same name as we did in the portal, put an API version in there, make sure that it depends on the parent, because else the API of Azure won't know the order in which to execute and provision your resources. And then in properties, you specify to which log analytics workspace this telemetry is being sent. You also have to indicate that we are using a dedicated table type. And here in the logs and in the metrics array, you see the exact same selection I just made in the portal. And that's it. That's all there is to it. You can do this for most resources. The same exact principle applies to now locally storage account being in public preview, but also databases, Synapse SQL pools, Databricks, you name it. Key Vault all works via the same principle. This can also be achieved by using Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, or calling the REST API. It's your choice. Working with ARM templates is just my personal preference. So also when identifying the problem, we can now, because of this child resource, that diagnostic setting, analyze those logs in our log analytics workspace using that Custo query language. You just saw me type some basic queries, and in a basic query in Custo, the query starts with the table name. Took me a while because I really like T-SQL, where we always start with the select and then the from, but Custo starts with from. Then we specify subsequent operations on that data using a pipe symbol, just like you would in Bash or preferably PowerShell. Using that pipe symbol, we can then introduce a where statement to filter our data, a join statement to join it, or start aggregating it using averages or counts or whatever you like. It also introduces stuff like more complex statistical analysis or calculating values for certain percentiles. This Custo query can be used as alert logic, or you can even render charts from your result set. So let's do a quick demo again. I'm now in my log analytics workspace. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to click Logs, which will again open up my query editor. You can save your queries here in your Query Explorer, where I can say, for Azure Thursday, I had that field pipeline alert already prepared. Very simple query, where I say, from my ADF pipeline runs table, get me everything with a failed status. And if I run this, you can see that the time range has been limited to the last 24 hours, which is cool because that maximum storage duration was 730 days. So make sure that you limit your queries to get quick response times. And this is a simple example. But what is cool about Custo is that you can go and type any query you like. So I want to show one query which is slightly more advanced. So in this query, you can still see that I'm using my pipeline run table, but I'm also using an activity run table, and I'm going to join these two. And the way I'm joining these two is by creating an object, just like we did in T-SQL with common table expressions, but now I'll have to use the let keyword. So I'm going to create an object, which is called activity runs, which is filled with the result set from the query activity run, where status is failed, and using the project keyword, I'm going to take 1, 2, 3, 4 columns from that result set. So activity run is going to get all my activities that have failed and take these 4 columns out of it. And I'm going to rename the status column to activity status. And this is the way I'm aliasing columns using the equality operator. Now I'm going to take the pipeline run table. I'm going to join this object, so not the table, but the object, on the resource ID, meaning that they're both member of the same resource, in this case, my Azure Data Factory, and on the run ID, meaning that the activity was part of the pipeline, where my pipeline status is succeeded and my activity status is failed. This can be the case if I have a retry mechanism on any type of activity in my pipeline, which first fails a couple of times, and then, let's say on the 4th or the 5th attempt, suddenly succeeds. This can be a good indication of, let's say, an overly saturated database. So definitely also worth taking into account. And these complex queries will help you create more intricate alerts. So we've gone through visualization options, alerting, but what should you alert on? What should you visualize on any type of monitor or workbook that you're trying to develop? Well, this is where SRE, Site Reliability Engineering from Google, will help us out a little bit. This practice tells us that if you monitor each of your resources based on these 4 golden signals, you'll establish a good monitoring baseline for your entire landscape. The 4 golden signals being latency, traffic, saturation, and errors. And I'll plot them on some examples. Latency could be in an analytics situation, a pipeline that took 50% more time today to complete than yesterday. I would like to know, because this signifies that something's going on. Traffic could be the number of concurrent connections that people are making to my database, or the number of concurrent API calls that my storage account gets to read or write data. Saturation is like its nephew or its brother. It's closely related to traffic. And it signifies the percentage of utilized resources compared to the total amount of available resources, like the percentage of consumed memory or CPU on a VM, but also the number of concurrent connections to my database versus the maximum amount of concurrent connections that this database can cope with. And errors, I've been using that one as an example throughout the presentation, is for instance failing pipelines, failed API requests, any type of response in the 400 or 500 range in HTTPs. If you implement these throughout your landscape on each resource, you will have a perfect baseline to get going, and you will make sure that you have a lingua franca, a common language. No matter what the underlying programming language or operating system is, anyone can monitor now using these 4 golden signals. So this is my last slide just before I'm going to sum up everything again. And that's how to design resource groups if you're interested in building this type of monitoring yourself. I always create 2 resource groups, one for the monitoring resources for the operations team to use or the DevOps team to use, and one for visualization resources, which mainly have a different or more broad audience than those monitoring resources. I then create 2 log analytics workspaces, one for internal Azure-based resources and one for external resources, being those 2 VMs on premises. Why? Because internal resources can leverage a more finely grained access model to that log data. Meaning, if I have read RBAC permission on a database, but not on the storage account, then log analytics will only show me records from that database if I query it. This finely grained access model does not apply to external resources. So if I mix external and internal resources, I immediately default to an all or nothing model. Well, to prevent this, make sure that you log your Microsoft's monitoring agent data in an external log analytics workspace, which is exactly the same as an internal one, only that you cannot apply that finely grained access model there. Next to this, in my monitoring resource group, I also place all my alerts. And if you follow the naming convention I just shown or something similar, you can at a glance see what type of resources are governed by which golden signals. And of course, it's also the place where I deploy my action groups. And then in my visualization resources group, I make sure that almost everyone that's interested in following the performance, the availability, and the predictability of the resources is able to see the list of dashboards and workbooks that we created. And then underwater, these widgets will only fill with the data you're allowed to see. So I can see that there is a dashboard, for instance, governing the availability of a database. But if I'm not allowed to read that database, I can click the dashboard, but the widgets don't fill up with the data. Which is good because people need to know what is available so they can request the access if they're curious. I'd rather have them request access and then deny it with a good reason than them not knowing that there even is a dashboard, right? So that's my final tip. So to sum it all up, make sure you start your monitoring journey with alerts, metric alerts or log alerts, but you don't want to spend your time staring at a dashboard waiting for something to go wrong. Then you can use log analytics to define those alerts at scale, but the metrics alerts don't always allow us to do. Apply 4 golden signals alert logics to all the resources in your solution. Don't skip one if it's part of the critical process. Leverage those existing visualizations in Azure, like the metrics explorer we saw, but also insight modules or the custom logs and log analytics before you start building your own. Create a monitoring resource group where you deploy all your alerts, alert groups, and your log analytics workspace or spaces if you have external resources, which warrant for a second log analytics workspace. That's it. That's all I had to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed it. I very much did, and thank you for having me.
Great. Martijn, thanks. Awesome session.
You're welcome.
Good
Here we are.
examples. Yeah.
Martijn, that was very cool. This monitoring solution seems like a big topic. So a question from Alex here. Is the activity runs, which you had in your log query, is that declared as a table or an array?
So I fetched them from a table, and I'm not sure what type of object the let keyword is making out of it. It's if he's familiar with a common table expression or inline view in T-SQL, I think that's best comparable. But you could also use let to just store a single value.
Okay, thanks. Question directly for me. The queries themselves, can they also be defined as something like infrastructure as code?
Yeah. I have a GitHub repository which I can share. Is there a possibility to share that stuff? Because I have templates prepared where you can deploy log analytics, log alerts, metric alerts, everything I just discussed, action groups, it's all in there.
Okay, cool stuff. So the monitoring solution and Kusto query language seem like big topics. And do you have any advice for us on where to start if you want to learn this, learn to use these components?
Yeah. Microsoft offers great tutorials on starting off with Kusto. It's a query language both used in log analytics as well as Azure Data Explorer. So there's lots of material out there taking you step by step through all the steps. And there's even a special step-by-step tutorial for people that come from a SQL background like me.
Okay, nice. I had another question about the auto remediation you talked about. Are there any specific types of issues you can and that you can't auto remediate, or any tips on that?
Oh yes, steer clear from auto remediation unless you're 100% positive on what you're doing. Reason being, I once created a solution where if we were receiving a brute force hack, so a lot of unauthorized authorization attempts on our database, that we would have a logic app or a function app that would then automatically try to block that IP address. And then before implementing, we thought about what would happen if a hacker would know we had this functionality, because it can then start sending these unauthorized requests from a diverse range of IP addresses, and we would just completely isolate our database, right? So auto remediation sounds really fancy, but first get some practice under your belt doing it manually. And if you then identify stuff that you can auto remediate, you can almost auto remediate everything, because an alert can trigger a function app. And as soon as you have a function app or a logic app, well, the sky's the limit.
Okay, well, very cool stuff. I'm hyped, so I'm going to start looking into this as soon as possible. And I want to thank you for your excellent session. Also, Happy New Year.
Yeah, thanks. Happy New Year to you all as well.
And before you leave, Just put your GitHub page in the chat and we will share that with the viewers as soon as possible, yeah?
Yeah, I will. Thanks,
Okay.
guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so next up we have Menaka Baskervilai. I hope I had your name right the first time.
Yes, you're correct.
Awesome. Okay, so also for you, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I checked out your Sessionize page, and you have a lot of topics that you speak about. So
Yes.
what I wanted to ask you, is there any specific topic that you're most passionate about?
Yes, basically I'm a .NET developer, but I work with Azure Cognitive Service. So that's the thing I usually do with things related to speech recognition and other things related to like monitoring stuff, which is related to AI service.
Okay, cool. You're going to be telling us about security and Azure networking?
Yes, today topic.
So I want to give you the floor. Tell us everything.
Yes.
Good luck.
Yes, definitely. Let me share my screen. Okay. Yes, today's topic is all about Azure Network Security Group. So before getting into the topic, I just want to make like why I choose this topic like Azure Network Security Group. There are a lot of servers available in Azure Marketplace. If we're going with one by one, we can explore a lot. But why I choose this common topic is this is the one topic where we can able to employ in all other topics. For example, this network security group we can able to use in our networking part as well as database part and lot of various area we can able to use. For example, we can able to use in virtual machine also. So compute to networking to data, everywhere we can able to use this network security group, and that's the reason why I choose this topic today. So next thing is about me. So I'm Menaka Baskapille. I'm working as a software engineer at Accenture. This is my profile where you can inquire me for any doubts. So what is network security group? For example, we can go with a normal demo. For example, I'm having my mobile phone. I want to share my network to another device. What the first step we will do is we will just click the button and we can click the share and other option, and the receiver need to put a password to receive the network, or we will restrict some user not to use my network. After getting the password they need to use. In other cases, we will allow certain people to use my network. I will block some of the people. I don't need someone to use my network. So these all are the things what we will do in real life scenario in network. If we come to the cloud end, how we can able to manage our private network. This is all about network security group. So it will filter the network from and to our Azure resource in an Azure virtual network. But not only in Azure, we can able to do in our on-premise, in other cloud service provider also. It constructed based on security rules which allow or delay inbound network traffic or outbound network traffic from Azure resources. So it is in both ways. You can able to control either the inbound traffic as well as the outbound traffic. You can able to write certain rules only for inbound, and I can able to leave okay outbound I don't need anything, as well as for outbound you can write only for outbound and you can leave inbound also. So all network security group contain a set of default rule. So you cannot able to skip this default rule by I don't need this rule to be needed for my network security group. I just need this rule to be removed. You cannot able to delete some default rule. You cannot delete the default rule, but since they are assigned the lowest priority, they can be replaced by the rules you create. So you can able to assign the priority for the rule which is default. For example, I don't need that rule, but I don't want it to be removed completely because I cannot remove. I can assign some low priority, so my task gets skipped on that particular rule set. So these all are the things about network security group as a definition. So what all are the rules that is commonly available? Because these all are the default rules that I need to follow. My name should be unique. Within the NSG, the name you were giving everywhere, wherever we are creating the resource or some other related to our application, the name should be unique. Same thing applicable to network security rules also. So the name should be unique. And the priority will be ranges from 100 to 4096. So the lower number will have high priority. So it will be taken from the ascending order. So the lowest number, high, will have the high priority. For example, 100 will have high priority and 4096 will have low priority. Source and destination. This is the part where we will need to employ our IP address. And protocol, the protocol can be a TCP, UDP, and ICMP, or any protocol we can employ in it. And the direction, forever it will be an inbound as well as outbound. The port range will be individual, or there will be a large number of ports you can able to give. The actions are common like allow or deny. So in what way the rules will get evaluated? So these all are the 5 things the rules evaluation will take place in NSG group. For example, it will be a source port, destination port, as well as the protocol. The evaluation will be within this. So everywhere there will be a 2 thing which is common, that is a source and destination. The protocol will vary according to your rule set. So what about the Azure Virtual Network? So this is a fundamental building block of your private network in Azure. As I said before, you can communicate via your Azure, via your internet, or any on-premise network. It does not need to be within the Azure service, within the Azure, or within the on-premise environment. It can be either from Azure or from to other cloud service provider, or from on-premise to Azure, or within Azure, whatever. The traffic may be filtered by means of network security group or by means of network virtual appliances. So this is about Azure Virtual Network. How the communication can be established between the Azure resources. It can be by virtual network or virtual network service endpoint or VNet peering. This is how the communication between the Azure resources will take place. How the communication with the on-premise resources will take place means the point-to-site virtual private network, that is VPN. This is what we will use when we need to connect our client Citrix with our desktop, and site-to-site VPN as well as Azure Express Route. This is how the communication with our on-premise resources will take place. So limitations per subscription. So whenever we are going with anything or any services, for example, if I go with Cosmo DB, it will have some cost because of the throughput and latency. Same with the network security group also, it has some limitations per subscription. This is also the list of limitations per subscription. The network interface cards will be 65,000 to 536 limits only you can able to use, as well as the rules per NSG is 1000, and subnets per virtual network is 3000, and public IP address you can able to add is only 10. So these are the limitations per subscription. So services that can be deployed into a virtual network. As I said before, this network security group is a common platform where you can employ this service in all other services. In compute, you can able to use in virtual machine, in batch jobs, everywhere. In network, you can able to use in firewall as well as the application gateway. In data, Redis Cache, as of now, the Redis Cache and Azure SQL Manager instance are available. In analytics, Databricks and HD Insights. In container, Azure Kubernetes as well as function. In web, if you are employing an API management service, you can able to use this NSG in this web part also. So these are the services that can be employed. So this is an important part of today's session, how this NSG works. So this is the TCP port 8. I just having a 3 subnets, subnet 1, subnet 2, subnet 3. If you see in subnet 1, I have for VM1, NSG1 and NSG2. And I have a network interface 1. So how the action take place in this subnet 1? For example, which one works first? Because I will have certain rules for NSG1 and NSG2. How the execution will take place? First of all, whatever the NSG group within the subnet, the NSG related to the subnet 1 will take place in action. How it will work is the NSG 1 related to subnet 1. It will never mind about the another NSG, how it is linked or how it is related to the VM. The NSG which is related to subnet 1 will take place its action. So next NSG2 will work along with the network interface. So after that, this is how the inbound traffic to VM will take place. The outbound traffic will be in the reverse order. So it will satisfy the rules of NSG2 and then NSG1 and then it will go out. So the inbound will be happen with the network security group that belongs to subnet after the network security group that belongs to the interface. In VM2, I don't have the network security group that belong to NIC. Here, all the actions will take place by means of subnet and NSG1. Since the outbound and inbound is same, because I have only one network security group, I don't need to mind about the interface network. And in subnet 2, I have a VM3 where I have my NSG2 only for NIC. So here I don't have a VM, I have a NSG for my subnet. So I have only one NSG that belongs to NIC. So the action will take place from the NIC after to VM3. The inbound and outbound traffic will be similar. So I can able to access the subnet 2 via NSG2 alone. I have no option. In VM4, it is open. I don't have any NSG groups supporting for inbound and outbound traffic. So I can able to access anywhere, and it do not have any security constraint that need to be met. So this is how NSG works both for inbound and outbound traffic. So let's go to the demo. So my demo is based on the requirement. The requirement is like I want to create two virtual machine. The two virtual machine need to one virtual machine I can able to access from my on-premise environment. The another virtual machine I am not allowed to use from my on-premise, but I can able to access that from the virtual machine which I created before. So the virtual machine 1 need to be open from my on-premise. The virtual machine 2 need to be open from the virtual machine 1 which I created. To connect both the virtual machine, I can use a virtual network. At the same time, I need to create the application network also, because in some constraint, I need to write the NSGs, that is network security, for the set of application with the common features, because I cannot able to create individual NSG for every application which is similar to each other. So in this constraint, I created two application network also. So this is my first virtual network which I am connecting my two VMs. So first I'm creating a virtual network, and then I'm creating the application for both the VM which going to be interlinked together. So this is both the thing. After that, I'm creating the virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2. Once after it is done, I'm creating the network security group. So these steps are like this can be modified based on the requirement, because my requirement is like I want both the VM to be connected on the same virtual network. At the same time, I don't want to give the rules or I need to modify things based on the individual constraint. I created two individual application service for this. So suppose my requirement can be vary, because I can simply create a single VM and I can able to access the inbound and outbound traffic by means of network security group. It is obviously we can go by normal step what we've done before. But here my requirement is based on the single virtual network where two VM need to be there, and one VM need to be connected from the on-premise, and another VM need to be connected from inside the VM which is created before. So in NSG, go to your inbound security rules. This is the rules where you can able to set the rules. There is a default rule. As I said before, you cannot able to delete this default rule, but yes, you can able to set the priority number. Based on the priority number, it will be the task will be taken place. So I have already created some inbound security rules. What I created is my constraint is like I want my one of my VM, that is VM1 management VM, to be connected from my on-premise. So I set the port number to 3389. The another VM I set the port to 80443. Why this VM is not connecting in my local premise, but it is connecting inside my another VM is because I connected both the VM via my virtual network. In virtual network, whatever the condition you write for NSGs, that is network security, it will work because both the VMs are connected on same network. So let's go to the VM. So this is a VM which I created that need to be worked inside the another VM I'm created. So I downloaded the RDB file of both VM. So this is the management VM that need to be connected from my on-premise environment. So first I'm working with the VM which will not work with the on-premise environment. So I already downloaded the RDB file. So I'm running this. the connection should not be established because of the rule set what we have written for inbound. So this is a pop-up error you will get when you are trying to connect this another VM where you set the inbound traffic rule not to be connected from the on-premise environment. That is the port number. So it will not work in the on-premise environment. So this is another VM, as I said, like which I need to connect from my on-premise environment. This is another VM. So I also downloaded the RDB file of this VM also. So let me open once again. Which need to be connected from my on-premise. I think something. Let me connect them. Cannot connect to remote or one or more is turned off. Okay, I think it is turned off. Let me repeat again. I have already connected this one. I think so. It is taking some time to connect. It's been open for a while. Let me see what is the issue now. Remote computer is not available on the network. Let me check this again. Your network is already connected. And the port number is also working. Image is also connected. Okay, let's check this. Which we have created MG1 and MG2. This need to be connected from the local on-premise environment. I think so. I have some issues in this. Let me check this time. Remote access to the server is not enabled. I have already enabled. Okay, the computer is turned off. Okay, I think so. Just have some issues before I've been already opened this. I think that's maybe the issue. Let me check again here. Already there. Okay, fine. I think I have some issues now to connect. It's there's not. The desktop cannot connect the record one of the. Okay, I think I already switched on many times and closed. I think something happened. Okay, fine. So it need to be connected. Then VM1, which is already I created, is need to be connected from my local on-premise environment. That is my VM management. When I downloaded the RDB file, it need to be connected. And once this VM is connected, I can able to access the another VM which I cannot able to access from my local on-premise environment. Because of the reason I set the inbound traffic rule here to 80443, it need to be connected within the VM which is already created from my on-premise environment. So this is how the network security group enable us to work in the environment where we need to connect or restrict, or we can able to establish something with the inbound as well as the outbound network receivers. So this is all about today's session. So based on my requirement, I created the virtual network. After that, I created 2 application support group, security group. After that, I created the VM for each support group. And then after that, I created the network security group where I set the inbound traffic rule to connect one particular VM from my local on-premise and another VM to within the another virtual machine which I have created. This is how network security group work together. I think it have some issues because I opened multiple time. I think because of demo issues, it's not yet working. But when you give the this in your virtual network, it will definitely work. I think this is all about today's session. So if you have any questions, you can ask me. I think it's not my day.
So
Hello.
hello.
Yes, I can able to hear.
Yes. Let's wait until we are back on the screen again.
Yes, okay.
Yes, there we are again. Thank you, Manaka, for your session.
Thank you.
Yeah, the demo gods were not in your favor today, right?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
because yes, I have used it multiple times. I opened and closed. Maybe that's the reason because it's not yet working because we cannot believe VM many times.
No.
Yes.
Oh, it happens to all of us sometimes. Yeah,
Yes.
too bad. We don't have any questions in the chat, so I made a couple up myself. And I'm not a network guru, so let's hope that that it makes any sense what I'm asking you right now. You
Yes.
showed us a slide about the limits of the Azure networking services, right?
Yes.
And do you see a lot of customers hit that limits in real-world solutions?
Yes, because in some cases, even when we connect the Citrix also, there is some constraint we need to connect from our client desktop only. At the time, we need to enable the VM that need to be support from the certain IP address. In that cases, we can use network security groups.
Oh, okay, thank you. And you also said that you cannot delete the default rules for the network security group.
Yes.
Why is that?
The default security groups are meant to be like they are the inbuilt one. The first reason that cannot be deleted is, and second thing is like the constraints are common for everywhere because these kind of things like what I said as default rules will be common for everywhere. So instead of adding one as a default rule when we creating the network security group, Microsoft made it readily available to user. So that groups maybe we will need to be used as a common thing. So we it needed for everywhere where we using the network security group, and that's the reason it's been available as a default one.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And one last one, if you have a resource configured with a public IP address, for instance, is that address, that same public IP address, then still reachable when it is behind the NSG, the network security group?
As I said before, if we have resource level, we need to go with the network security group. Like I created an application support service, and then you need to access that. If it is via the virtual network, we don't need to consider the network security group constraint. Whatever the virtual network which being connected on the common, it will be works on. So for resource level, it will be a great constraint whenever you are working on the network security group, you need to give a certain access and you need to enable or disable based on that resource where you are working.
Okay. Thank you. So I have no further questions. I really want to thank you for this great session. I really enjoyed it. Oh, there is one question though.
Okay.
Let's wait. The question is, can you block with NSG default protocols like HTTP?
Yes.
So can you block the default protocols like HTTP using an NSG? The question by Alex.
Yes. Basically, the NSG will support, as I said before, the API management also, APM. So with this kind of thing, you can able to block as well as you can deny it is not like a blocking, you can deny the access or something like that. It is not about blocking. Here they will use like allow or deny. We can perform that.
Okay. Thank you. So that's the last one. Again, thank you very much for this session.
Thank you. Thank you.
And see you again, hopefully soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
So for now, we have one remaining session. And that is Scott Hanselman, and he already joined the call. There he is. Hi, Scott.
Oh.
Hi again.
Hi.
Hi. Yes, you're in the middle of it right now.
I'm trying a new microphone. Does it sound okay?
Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah.
Shiny.
Yeah. So great that you are joining us again today for the second time. Yeah.
I'm learning about your three. I see we have 3 people in a row. So there we go. I'll move my camera. That was a great presentation. We have a lot of talented people here on Azure Thursday, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, a lot of talented people. Yeah, we had 2 great sessions again this evening. Yeah, we did.
Well, now the pressure's on.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. You really have to perform and you have to deliver. Yeah.
Lower your expectations now, my friends.
So
how do you get comments? If people have questions, how do those questions come in?
They come in the chat on the website, and we will note them, and we normally will ask them at the end of each session.
I would love it if you interrupted me.
Yeah.
I think one of the fun things about events like Azure Thursday that are live is that if I just give a presentation, then it's really just a YouTube. And then it's just me talking at someone. But if there's a question that comes in, it's really exciting to have someone say, "Oh, Hank, slow down, Scott. Let's talk about that right there. I want to hear." So feel free to interrupt. I will watch the live chat as well if I see anybody. So it's much more fun, I think, when we have interaction. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. There is a bit of a lag between us and the live session, about 30 seconds or something like that. So
okay. Good to know.
I will do my best to interfere your presentation when there is a question.
I would love it if you would interfere with my presentation.
Okay, I will. So you were with us in July, and you talked about the migration of your blog. You were basically still in the middle of migrating that blog in that time, right? And now you're back. And now your blog is finished and migrated, right?
Yes. Now, certainly I haven't been working on that full time, but for those who may have missed the story, the idea, people are asking about my glasses. This is my old man glasses. I'm seeing in the chat there. This is when you see people doing this. And then when they get their phone, they get to go and they go far away from the phone. These are my reading glasses. I just feel more comfortable, I think, today. My blog has been sitting on real metal. All this time I've been talking about Azure and talking about the cloud and doing all kinds of things on the cloud. But my blog has been around since 2001, 2002, and it was sitting not on a virtual machine. It was sitting on physical metal. And it's not that I meant it to stay there for almost 20 years. It's just one of those things that happens. And I realized that that's a thing that I think happens to all of us, is we have a legacy system and it works just fine. And we don't want to piss it off, so we just don't do anything. We just let it sit there. And then a year goes by and a year goes by, and the next thing you know, you go, is that system still running on that computer under Anna's desk? We should probably do something about that, right? It's the very definition of lift and shift, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and you did it.
Well, so it was harder than I thought, because I think with all legacy systems, there's layers, right? So it was on a physical machine. It was not on a virtual machine. And this is unfortunate, because I thought for many years that it was actually on a virtual machine. And that was a miscommunication with my hoster, which I think is something we can also relate to a little bit. I thought that it was running on a virtual machine, and I called them and I said, hey, the disk is full. It's a 30 gig disk, only 30 gigs. And I had no space, and my blog was going down every few weeks because of log files.
Okay.
So I said, hey, could you expand the disk? And they said, oh, we thought this is on a real disk, like it's on spinning Rust. And that's such an interesting thing that I think people who have been born on the cloud forget that there are still hard drives out there that spin that you can listen to. So that means that you could actually visit my blog on your phone, maybe hit refresh. And if you were in the same room as the host, you could listen to it and go and hear the spinning Rust, right? With the cloud, of course, we can't do that. We can't visit that machine because it's actually distributed. So that was an issue. Like, how do I get it off the physical machine? It hadn't been deployed in a couple of years. It ran on Windows. It ran on Windows Server 2008. So we're on a 13-year-old operating system, 20-year-old blog software on a physical machine. So it was really a process. So I think we can have a chat here like we are, which is quite nice. And I'll show you how I did it and what was involved, because there's URLs that I don't want to break. There's DNS issues to think about. There's getting off of Windows 2008. There's SSL issues and security issues, because I want to make sure my certificates are all TLS. And doing it in such a way that no one noticed it. And I don't think anyone noticed that I did this. And then doing what's called a scream test. Are you familiar with that term, a scream test?
No, not really.
That's when you turn a system off that you're not sure anyone uses, and you wait to see if anyone screams.
Okay.
So I got the whole thing set up. I moved Hanselman.com, Hanselman.com/blog, and Hansel Minutes, my podcast, all over. And I wasn't sure that I hadn't removed, did I remove all of the dependencies on the existing system? So I had to call the hoster and say, would you please shut off that computer? I don't want you to disable it. I don't want you to delete it. I don't want you to cancel my account. Just turn it off. And I'm going to wait for a few days and see if anybody screams. Right? Okay. Did I break some CSS? Did I ruin, was there a hard-coded IP address somewhere? Like, was there any subsystem that was assuming something? I wasn't really sure that I was fully off the system. And scream tests are a really great way to find out whether or not you even need to move the legacy system. But I did, of course.
Okay, great. And now you are going to show us how you did that, right?
Because I'll kind of walk you through the thinking about that. Yeah, so I'll share my screen then. Is that all right?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Cool. Okay, so I want to also bring up Notepad that I will basically just going to be keeping some notes and explaining a little bit of what I was trying to do. And I'm not saying that this is perfect, and you did point out that I spoke to you a little bit about this 6 months ago. So why did it take so long? It's because I was doing it an hour here and an hour there. Okay, so let's pretend that, let's pretend that Hanselman.com and the Hanselman company is an actual thing. It's not, it's just me. But that's the other thing that's exciting about the cloud is that you feel like you have an entire IT department. Like I feel like I'm a dozen people and I have this whole system now, but it's just me. And that's such a joy. to have multiple websites deploying on the regular, to having Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions and testing, built-in container, all of this stuff would have taken a half dozen people and a whole team, but it's just me. And that's one of the great things about the cloud. So Hanselman.com, Hanselman.com/blog, and then Hansel Minutes. Those are the 3 websites that make up the Hanselman family of websites. So if we go to Hanselman.com, this is my kind of my brochureware website. It's the home page. It has the list of the last blog posts. It has places that I'm going to speak at, which I haven't updated for this year yet, links to books. It's also a series of mini sites, so like my about page and my speaking page and my podcast page. But it is not a complicated site. It's a pretty straightforward site. It is separate, though, from Hanselman.com/blog, which is a whole app. And Hanselman.com/blog has a ton of content going back 18 years. So if we pick a year and then start scrolling, you can see that I kind of pretty consistently blog every Tuesday and Thursday, basically twice a week for 20 years. And I don't want to lose any of that content. I also don't want to break any URLs. There's the regular blog URLs. But if we look, for example, at my tools list, I also have some URLs that are unusual or custom. So let me fix my Zoom it here. Here we go. So here's an example of a custom URL, which isn't a site. If you go to Hanselman.com/tools, it's like a bit.ly, but it's not a bit.ly. It's just a custom redirect. There's also historical URLs. And by historical, I mean when my blog in 2002 used things like permalink.aspx GUID equals something, 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 like really, really, really old URLs. I don't want to break any of those either. There was the issue that Hanselman.com was written on ASP.NET and an older version of that. So you might go and find, some blog title.aspx. I complicated things by wanting to make this URL format something more modern. I wanted to go from what's called Pascal casing to kebab casing. And that's totally out of scope of moving to Azure, but it overcomplicated things for me, which is something to think about. Plus, again, I was on an older version of Windows Server, so I even had challenges with like TLS and things like that. So the first thing I wanted to do was get the brochureware website running. And that was written in ASP.NET and MVC. So if I come out here to the command line, I'm using the Windows terminal, and I recently made it look pretty with the Oh My Posh, and I've written about this on my blog. So here I've got the source code for Hanselman.com, and I wrote this in .NET and just moved it to .NET Core. So I should be able to just say .NET Build, and you can see that it's now running on .NET 5, which of course we know is cross-platform, and that allows me to run it on Linux. So this was pretty straightforward. This was a simple website that I made in .NET, and because it was not doing anything complicated, moving it over to .NET Core was fairly trivial. Where things got interesting were the fact that I was using Iis on Windows Server 2008. Okay, so 12-year-old website on Iis 7. Iis 7 has a thing called Iis Rewrite Rules that I think those of us of a certain age are familiar with, and those are done in XML. If there is no Iis, if I go from Iis 7 to Linux on Azure rather, App Service, and I use containers, what's going to happen to all of these rewrite rules? What's going to happen to that? Well, fortunately, .NET Core includes middleware that is right here. Add Iis URL rewrite. And that's really powerful. That's a huge bridge People who are doing legacy work on Iis, who are familiar with this XML file, should really take a moment to think about that. That was the fundamental trick that allowed me to get off of Iis, because I could read in, I could ingress that file as a file format without using Iis. So if we look at the file, what's going on here? Remember I had that /tools? I've been doing my tools list for 15 years. I wanted to make it so none of those URLs broke. So I need redirects. So I filled this with redirects, as well as a couple of other cool features, and was able to not have to convert that. I just ingressed, I just sucked that file in directly. Oh, I also have a newsletter. That's another thing. That's another redirect to think about. So being able to bring that file in was huge. Another thing that I've been doing, which is a little bit clever, I think, is sometimes people steal my content. Sometimes people will reblog my content, and that really bothers me. So I made this PNG file that says if you're seeing this image, you've stolen my blog. And then I have a list of websites that have stolen my blog and reblogged it. So here in the Iis Rewrite.xml, if someone requests a picture from me from one of these evil people, they will end up with my text, but with all of the images replaced saying that they're evil. And that has discouraged people. That was all done, again, in Iis many, many years ago, and I've written about that on my blog. You can go and search for it. That all worked when I sucked in that Iis URL rewrite, which is really powerful. Now, if we go over to Azure, and let's do it like this. Let's go into Azure from here. And go to our app services and find the blog. And I'm going to back out and show you the app service plan. Okay, so I have a couple of app service plans. Here's my Linux app service plan. And I wanted to move to Linux from Windows because it's about 30% cheaper. And that was super helpful. Being able to see a cheaper experience was important to me. And right now I've got 3 apps on app service. I know that the folks who watch Azure Thursday probably know this, but it's an important reminder. You don't have to have one website per app service plan. It's very expensive to do that. In my opinion, we should make these machines work as hard as possible. If we look here, I'm using about 50% of my memory, but only 10% of my CPU. This app service plan, I should probably either make it smaller or I should put more stuff in it. I should make it work harder. This is not like a regular virtual machine. We want these things to work as hard as possible so that we don't have to pay any money. If I click on that, you can see that I'm running my website, my blog, and the podcast all now in one app service plan. Now, this is based on Linux. Now, I have about 20 or 30 other sites. I wanted to save money on those. 6 of them live in a Windows app service plan that has really high memory and really low CPU. That's because I do really aggressive caching. One of the things about Azure that I think people also don't realize is that they give you tons of memory. Maybe the CPU isn't as fast, maybe the disk isn't as fast, but memory on Azure is cheap. So I architected my sites to cache huge amounts of information, which is super helpful. Again, if you have any questions, I would encourage you to ask them in the chat if I'm going too fast or too slow or you want more information. While I was doing this, it wasn't just moving the Hanselman family of things, but I've also got, I think, 19 other small websites. These small websites are like my kids' blog and little brochureware websites like keysleft.com, which is how many keystrokes do you have left in your hands before you die. and babysmash.com, which is a game that I wrote for kids. All these websites, I want them in the cloud. I want them to be HTTPS. I want them to be in GitHub, and I want them to auto deploy. All of these sites I want in Azure as well. So what I ended up doing was using Azure static sites, Azure static web apps. So I moved, oh, you got a question?
Yeah, I have a question, because there are a lot of products that you can choose from when you decide to create a web application. And you've chosen the app service plan, so you've chosen web apps and Linux web apps. And you say that's because of costs. Why haven't you chosen for containers in this case?
That's a great question. So if you go and say app service, make an app service plan, there's Windows app service, Linux app service, and then Linux for containers, right? Mm-hmm. It turns out that the Linux app service on Azure uses containers anyway, whether you use them or not. So when you make a Linux web app, it's going to go and use a container. It's going to spin up Docker. It's going to pick the container for you, and it will be used either way. So the only difference between Linux web apps and Linux web apps for containers is, do you care enough to own the container image, or do you want them to own the container image?
Fair. That's fair.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I may be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. But so then the idea is, if I go into the app service and I pick, well, .NET 5, do I want to be responsible for keeping .NET 5 updated, thereby keeping my container layers updated, or do I want to let them do it? It's basically, how platform as a service do I want it to be? Do I want it to be very platform as a service, or just a little bit platform as a service?
Okay, yeah, good decision then in that case. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, if I was more of a container person, this is a great question, and thank you for having it. If I was more containery, and I'll show you my container files, so they do have Docker files, I would have insisted on it, because if I wanted, I would want control. So if we switch back to my machine here for a second, and I go back to Hansel Minutes, which is the podcast site, Hansel Minutes. I actually have a Docker file. I'll bring it. Actually, let me open it with VS Code. That'll be nicer. So that Docker file I actually used for development, but I didn't feel strongly about doing it for deployment, because here, I build in .NET 5. I copy the code in, including my tests, and it's a multi-stage Docker file. I'm actually doing the build inside the container. I'm doing the test inside the container, the publish inside the container, and then the final layer is the runtime one. But I'm doing in my actual Azure DevOps build, which I'll show you in a little bit, I'm doing a self-contained build, which means I include ASP.NET along for the ride. So I'm in a situation here where I could use these two layers here, this layer rather, as my final ultimate deployment one. But because they were using them already and I did a self-contained build, I didn't think it was necessary. It also would have meant I would need to think about this stuff. And I really like being able to go into app services, Hansel Minutes Linux, configuration, and under general settings, I selfishly like this. All I'm really doing by picking that is picking a container. So it's an issue of, do I want to control my container indirectly, or do I want to control my container absolutely directly? Here I have choice. So Alex in the chat is asking, what app service plan do I use? I'm using the standard Linux one, which if I go into Hansel Minutes Core Linux and we go and look at our log, let's see if it's actually turned on. Let's try app service logs. Log stream? Can never remember where the logs are. They're in 16 different places. Let's see if it'll let us connect. then you'll see the Docker images that are spinning up in the background. Martin is asking, why did I choose to build and test within the container instead of GitHub Actions? I do both. That's a great question. So this right here, if I were to go and say Docker test, notice that I have test.ps1. So I can test in Windows here. I can test in Linux in a Docker container, and I can check in DevOps. So I have a lot of flexibility here. I can do whatever I want. I've set this up in such a way that here I can build and test in Docker, which I'm doing right now. I can test in Windows. And if we go over to DevOps, or certainly GitHub Actions, I can do the exact same thing. So when we go, actually right now, this is here my testing and my building is happening. Here's Azure DevOps. I'm using that because GitHub Actions didn't exist. If I go into the Hansel Minutes website and then go into pipelines, you can see that 6 hours ago, a pipeline ran. So I'm using Dependabot. So if we look at my GitHub repositories, Hansel Minutes, I have pull requests coming in from Dependabot. Here's one from 6 hours ago. And then that pipeline ran over here. And within that pipeline, the testing ran as well in that job. So I could do that work here, or I can do it up here. It doesn't matter. So I don't really care whether it's on the metal or in a container or whatever. Does that answer your questions? I'm a little bit less opinionated, I think, than I could be. Like, am I all in on containers? No, I'm in on containers for when I need it. But it offers me great flexibility. Additionally, I'm always aware of when I can run in containers and when I can run on the metal. And I am kind of slightly low-key, always making sure that it runs everywhere. I want to make sure stuff runs on Windows, Linux, and containers at all times, just for future flexibility. I would be sad if I accidentally switched something over where it no longer ran in containers, or I broke it on Windows. I don't need Windows, but I like to have that flexibility. So if we look at my code and look at the Azure pipelines, on this one, we're only testing on Ubuntu and Linux when we do the build. But on my blog, I'm actually building and testing on Windows at the same time, just in case I might someday want to switch back. All right. I think I've lost my train of thought now.
Scott, could I ask you one question before you continue?
Of course, please ask your question.
So you were showing us all of the redirect stuff, right? Supporting the old URLs, and you do that using the Iis middleware.
Thank you, friend. Bye-bye. Close the door, sir.
No problem. So my question is there any dedicated Azure service that could help you get the same result without keeping all of those redirect things in your code base?
I'm sorry, let me make sure I understand this because I was distracted by my son. Are you asking me if there is a service that could get me those redirects without having to maintain that XML file?
Yeah, so without it actually being connected to your application itself.
Okay. So if you were to do a URL remap like that, that can happen at multiple layers. I'm doing it when it's already entered Azure, it's already entered the app service, and I am making it the responsibility of the application to do that work. So when the HTTP request terminates at that point, my application makes that decision, and it's making it with the Iis middleware. We are using the Iis add-on middleware. It's emulating Iis. There's also an HT access thing that can absorb HT access. That would still, to your point, be done with the application's responsibility. I could do that as a rewrite rule using Azure Front Door. So when the HTTP call comes in and hits Hanselman.com, it's actually hitting an Azure front door, an AFD. And Azure front door is here. And if we go to the front door designer, we can see I've got Hanselman.com, I've got Hanselman staging, I've got the main site and the blog, and then I have a series of routing rules. I could do routing rules and use the routing engine within Azure Front Door. However, each of these routing rules is, and I could be off $1 or $2, but it's $5 a month per rule. And I've got 30 or 40 of them. It's silly for me as a small business to spend $100 a month to maintain those URLs. Now, they've added a feature within this that is patterns to match and rules engines that I could theoretically do cheaper, but it still is not, in my opinion, Azure Front Door, while it's an amazing thing, is not great for managing dozens or certainly not hundreds of these things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it totally does. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing that you've brought up, and I want to make sure that the audience understands this, is a very important concept, because what he did is he pushed back on an architectural decision. And what's significant about that architectural decision is that there's no wrong answer. There are only trade-offs. It's thinking about that stack, and that's cloud thinking. It's really thoughtful. It comes in and it hits the Azure front door. There's a moment of opportunity to do that redirect. Then where does it hit? Well, then it hits Azure App Service, and there's a moment of opportunity there. There's middleware, there's Nginx, and there's Iis, and there's whatever Azure App Service is doing. Some of it's hidden from us, some of it isn't. Then there's the application's responsibility. And then from the point of view of the pipeline within .NET Core, there's the .NET Core pipeline. So any number of opportunities to interact with and to spit back a redirect, to spit back a 302. Additionally, I could have used Cloudflare. I could have used an alternative external front door for my routing, although it wouldn't have been cleanly integrated like Azure Front Door is, because with Azure Front Door, I'm not doing redirects, I'm doing forwards, which is really, really important. Let's talk about that for just a brief second before I answer a couple of the questions from the chat. This issue here, there is Hanselman.com, which is a website. So let's look at that for just a moment here. We go to Hanselman.com. That is here. It is this site. So you look at this URL. No matter what you do, you're going to get a URL that's mywebsite.azurewebsites.net. If I visit that, it says unavailable, because I've written code in my app that says I don't want anyone to accidentally visit here. Right? This is a thing people don't ever do. You really want to think about that. You may have a version of your website that is available at azurewebsites.net, and you've just never said, I don't want it available there. I only want it available at Hanselman.com. This URL will always be mywebapp.azurewebsites.net. I can't stop that, but I can reject the traffic, and I can say, no, I don't want to allow people to do that. So this is a website. That is Hanselman.com. Okay. Blog is a separate website. So we go Hanselman blog, which is here. Oops, that's it. That's App Insights, pardon me. Blog. There we go. The blog also has a weird URL that I reject. I only want to be at /blogs. But this is an app. This is an app. Applications like to run at a top-level URL. So I have to think about this. What I'm doing is I'm going like this. You see? And I can't forget this piece. We have a front door that is forwarding to a top level location here. And if we go back to AFD and we look at that routing rule here under the front door designer, there are two backend pools, the main site and the /blog. Okay. When you hit /blog, the pattern to match is here. The backend pool is forwarded only, not redirected. I wouldn't want to do a redirect. I'd lose my /blog, right? So then I have to acknowledge that it's not located at one folder down, one thing down. And here's where it gets kind of weird. We go and find my code there for this particular blog, which is here. This will make sense in a second, so hang in there, friends. I think it's in, where is it? Oh, it's actually over here, I forgot. Startup. We have to configure forwarded header options. Okay, we need to make sure that the headers that Azure Front Door applies, and there's a thing that's called X forwarded for. X forwarded for. This isn't an Azure thing. This is a cloud thing. And that makes it so when I hit hanselman.com/blog/foo, that it shows up as whatever Azure websites /flu. I don't want that /blog in here. So I have to maintain that illusion for a while, and that can be really challenging. So I walk through that process and exactly what you need to do to make sure that that happens. And there's a thing in .NET called base path. Yeah, James Vandenberg's in the application gateway. There are different ways to do this. So you have to think about this path base and deal with proxies that change or they don't change that. And you have to basically like lie to your application. So you really need to be thoughtful about that. You can often get confused when you're doing this kind of work. But what's interesting about it is that it's enabled me to go and say, there's hanselman.com, which is site 1. There's /blog, site 2, and then there's Hansel Minutes, which is site 3. I could, if I wanted to, make /podcast point to site 3, right? I could basically make that forwarded to that, and it would cost me for the price of a routing rule inside of Front Door. Isn't that cool? A lot of flexibility, I want to go back to a question that Javi said in the chat, which is what is Dependabot? Dependabot is, in my opinion, one of the most amazing and joyful things that GitHub has to offer. And what it is, oh, and by the way, I just noticed something. This is totally random, but I do a lot of live streams and stuff like this. So I didn't know that. I'm giving a little backstage tip here for friends who are watching. Notice how when I put my head like this, I'm looking at my monitor, but because we put my head on the left, it looks like I'm looking away from the code. When I do a video for YouTube or I think about a thing like this, I usually want to know which side I'm on. So I should have made it so I'm looking at this monitor, and then I'd be able to like point at the code. This is a stupid little thing, but it's just interesting because it's like I'm looking, why is he looking away at the code? Well, because it's on this monitor. So you could invert me, you could swap me, or you could move me to the other side, or you could flip my head and just point me in the other direction. But that's one of the little things. If you ever put on a big conference and you got a person with 3 monitors, think about, well, where are they looking and why is he looking up, So that's why I'm looking over this way. So forgive me, because the monitor's here, but it's actually over here. Okay. Dependabot is another person who is looking at my code and noticing that there's a new version of something and making a pull request. So check this out. I'm one person. I'm the only coder on this thing. And 6 hours ago, someone who's not a real person just said, hey, alt cover is a NuGet package, and it went from this version to that version. That's such a nice thing. What a convenient thing. Like if an actual human did that, I would be like, that's so nice. This is the part that gets amazing. If you open up the release notes, they actually looked at the releases and did a diff, and they're listing what changed. If that was a human, you'd be like, wow, you went above and beyond. That was so nice. And the actual list of commits between these two versions. So I can go now and click on these and see what changed. And then, because I've set this up with Azure DevOps, this got built. Remember, if I went back over to Azure DevOps, that pipeline ran. So I can see if the tests passed for this thing. So look at that. Someone, again, a bot, but one of my many employees here at Hanselman Incorporated, updated thing, did a pull request, tested it. I have 4 that are skipped. That's actually 100%. This is because these 4 run in Selenium, and I don't have Selenium working yet. So, did you flip me? You're awesome. Was that you? See, now I can look over here and see how natural it is. Look at that. Such a good, this is why I love Azure Thursday, so professional. So now all tests have passed and all I have to do is say merge. So look at this. If I go back up to pull requests, these are all bumps and I can either close them or not close them. Dependabot is a joy. And if you, as with all programmers, just put the word Hanselman in front of all of your Google queries, you just say Hanselman and then whatever, just write Hanselman Dependabot, then I've got a blog post about that. So I walk exactly like why it's amazing and why it's a joy and why you should check it out. It's super amazing. That's what Dependabot is. It's great. I love it. I
have another question about this.
Oh, what do you got?
This scares me, man. Are you just accepting these pull requests at some point, or are you manually testing stuff in between? Because couldn't anything change in one of these packages that it's automatically updating for you and break your everything?
Okay, this is a great question. So let's think about this for a second. This is the Hanselman company, right? We have offices all over the world and Starbucks worldwide, thousands of employees, basically just me and a bunch of bots. If we were a bunch of humans, then are you saying that a human would notice this and a human would manually test that? Well, what would that human do? Well, they would probably have to go and find out what changed between the versions and then look at those things and then probably run some tests. Well, I did run some tests. It's automatic. So all the boring human stuff happened. I ran all the tests. The site still works. I know the commits. Now, the only thing that I could do as a human now is basically read this code. But if I fundamentally trust my test, now I realize that it's just a brochureware website and 23 tests isn't a lot, but those tests check to make sure URLs didn't break, that the site still compiles, that the site still runs. These are real tests. This isn't just like unit tests. I have integration tests in here as well. I can see that the duration of the run went up by 6 seconds. So maybe there's a problem, like a perf regression. But 80 or 90% of the work has already been done. The boring work's been done. So then the real question you're asking is, do I blindly merge this? It depends. It depends on how scary it is. I would blindly merge that because it's a code coverage tool. It's not used at runtime, and it's a minor version. I would not blindly do 2 major versions of a UI portion.
Right.
Does that make sense? I would happily do that. It's a minor build of a Microsoft thing. So yes and no, use good sense. But think about the immense amount of work here. What a joy this is that 10 pull requests have come in. And I need to do this work anyway. Let the bots work for you. And this is what I think is so great about automation and the cloud, is that not only do I get to be a worldwide international company that's so fancy, here at Hanselman Incorporated. But I also, like, this is, I always like to do this, by the way. I like to show people this. This is how I feel like I'm a big fancy company. Because you ever like walk into like a fancy company and they have like a TV in the lobby with like a picture of the world with pins of all their offices? Like, if you want to be a fancy company too, you just buy a cheap TV and you mount it on your wall, right? And then just like have the TV up there and put this dashboard there. Azure App Service does this for you. It shows me my load times, my browser exceptions, I got a CPU spike. A whole team would have done that. So I have all the flexibility on the runtime side, all the flexibility on the build side, and all the flexibility on the code side. This is what we talk about when we say developer productivity. It means I don't have to worry about the boring crap. Does that answer your question? I don't mean to get off like on a lecture here, but I want people to be excited about this. This is freaking exciting. If you trust your tests, and this is important, if I had, let's say I had 200 tests. Let's say I went here, and this said 230. And then you just said, which was a great question, do you trust that? I would say, dude, I have 230 tests. I trust it. If I had 2,300 tests, if I was a real company, the more tests I have, yeah, I'd probably blindly do these things. Or at least I'd spend 20 minutes looking at them. It wouldn't be like, do them all. But the tests need to represent reality. And if the tests pass, it should work. Oh, and then Alex
Awesome.
is making a great point in the chat, and you can do an easy rollback. And that's another thing I want to point out, by the way, about Azure App Service as we get towards the end of our conversation here. This was huge for me. Remember, I was running on spinning Rust. This is so important. I mean, seriously, snapshots and backups. Having snapshots and backups, you know, the oh shoot button that you can just go, oh shoot, and then click it and then go back. Yeah. No, Alex is saying the bot will not overrule you. No, absolutely not. So deployments are up to me. So here's the last time I deployed. Even though those builds happened, they have not been deployed because a build, which has occurred in a build pipeline, here's all of my recent pipeline runs, right? Here's the runs. These are all the builds, is not a release. Releases are going to be manual. Good questions. I think I have a meeting now, so I'm at the end of my time. I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, this was fun.
I'm glad.
Yeah, this was really great. Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
You've shown us that we really have some great talent on the Azure Thursday, right?
I am just happy to be one of the 3 wonderful talks today, and I appreciate everyone hanging out with us. And yeah, follow me on Twitter and TikTok. Hey, I started a TikTok because the young people, they love the TikTok. So I'm a huge TikTok star now. I've been on there for almost a day.
Wow. Wow. And do we have a lot of followers already?
So true story. Yesterday, while America burned, I shut off my Twitter because it was stressing me out. So I went and I made a TikTok because that's what you do when your country's in crisis. And I have 13,000 followers in one day on TikTok. Wow. I think it's my dancing that is so nice. So you should definitely follow me on TikTok.
Okay, we will. Thanks again, Scott.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Bye.
So we're at the end of the evening. We had 3 great talks. So a lot of interesting stuff that they've shown us. So I really want to thank all 3 of the speakers for that great session. And at last, I also want to thank a huge thank to our sign language interpreters. They did a great job tonight as well. Again, they always do a great job for us. So thank you all for watching. We will post these videos on our YouTube channel as well. So if you want to see them or watch them again or later on, you can go to our YouTube channel and watch them over there. So thanks a lot. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next month. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.